Kim Dae-han was accused of starting the February 18th blaze by igniting a carton filled with gasoline inside a subway train in Daegu, South Korea's third-largest city. The Daegu District Court convicted him, Wednesday, of arson and homicide. Prosecutors had asked for the death penalty, but the court gave Kim a life sentence, saying he was repentant and appeared to have been mentally unstable when he committed the crime. The fire engulfed one 6-car train, then spread to another that pulled into the station a few minutes later, killing at least 198 people and injuring 147 others. About 30 relatives of the victims were at the court hearing and angrily protested the verdict, calling it too lenient, said South Korea's Yonhap news agency. The court also sentenced 2 train drivers to 4 and 5 years in prison and 2 subway officials to 3 years in prison on negligent manslaughter charges for failing to evacuate passengers. 3 other subway officials received suspended jail terms on the same charges. Both prosecutors and the accused can appeal the verdicts within a week. The Daegu subway fire of February 18, 2003, killed at least 198 people and injured at least 147. An arsonist set fire to a train stopped at the Yungangno station of the Daegu Metropolitan Subway in Daegu, South Korea. The fire then spread to a second train which had entered the station from the opposite direction. The arsonist was Kim Dae-han, a 56-year-old unemployed former taxi driver who had suffered a stroke in November 2001 that left him partly paralyzed. Kim was dissatisfied with his medical treatment and had expressed sentiments of violence and depression. He later told police he wanted to kill himself, but to do so in a crowded place rather than alone. By most accounts, on the morning of February 18th, he boarded train 1079 on Line 1 in the direction of Daegu, carrying a duffel bag that contained 2 green milk cartons filled with a flammable liquid, possibly paint thinner or gasoline. As the train left Daegu station around 9:53 a.m., Kim began fumbling with the cartons and a cigarette lighter, alarming other passengers who tried to stop him. One of the cartons spilled in the struggle, and its liquid contents caught fire when the train pulled into Yungangno station in downtown Daegu. Kim, his back and legs on fire, managed to escape along with many passengers on train 1079. But within 2 minutes, the fire had spread to all 6 cars. The fire spread quickly in the insulation between the layers of aluminum that form the shell of the vehicles, the vinyl and plastic materials in seat cushions and strap handles, and heavy plastic matting on the floors, producing thick smoke as it burned. The train operator, Choi Jong-hwan, failed to notify subway officials immediately of the fire. Smoke was visible on their closed-circuit television monitors, and subway officials radioed the operator of train 1080, Choi Sang-yeol, advising him to proceed with caution because there was a fire in the station. Train 1080 entered Yungangno station and stopped alongside blazing train 1079, approximately 4 minutes later. The doors opened only briefly, then shut, apparently to keep out the toxic smoke that had filled the station. Shortly after train 1080's arrival, an automatic fire detector shut down the power supply to both trains, preventing train 1080 from leaving the station. Transcripts show Choi Sang-yeol made 3 announcements advising passengers in train 1080 to remain seated while he attempted to reach superiors. Finally, he was informed, "Quickly, run somewhere else, go up, kill the engine, and go." Choi then opened the doors and fled, but in doing so, he removed the master key, shutting down the onboard batteries that powered the train doors, effectively sealing passengers inside. Later investigation showed 79 passengers remained trapped inside train 1080 and died there. Inadequate emergency equipment also worsened the disaster. Daegu subway trains lacked fire extinguishers, and the stations lacked sprinklers and emergency lighting. Many victims became disoriented in the dark, smoke-filled underground station and died of asphyxiation, looking for exits. Emergency ventilation systems also proved inadequate. Over 1,300 fire and emergency personnel responded, and the fire itself was extinguished around 1:25 p.m. However, the toxicity of the smoke prevented them from entering the station for another 3.5 hours. The intensity of the fire made it difficult to assess the number of victims accurately. Most were burned beyond recognition, many to the bone, and required DNA analysis to identify. A total of 191 bodies were found and identified. 6 additional bodies were found but so thoroughly destroyed that they could not be identified, and one person's possessions were identified, but remains could not be located. As the incident occurred late in the morning rush hour, most victims were students or young women working in the downtown district's department stores, which opened at 10:30 a.m. Many could contact loved ones on their mobile phones, and mobile phone operators released call connections and attempted records to help authorities determine who was in the station. Choi Sang-yeol could not be located for 11 hours after the accident, and investigators later discovered he had contacted officials from the subway corporation during that time. The master key from train 1080 was found in an office at the Ansem train depot. Omissions from transcripts of radio communications also heightened suspicion of an attempted cover-up. On February 26, 2003, authorities arrested Kim Dae-han, who had fled to a hospital for treatment. They also arrested both Choi and 6 Daegu Metropolitan Subway Corporation officials, the head of which was fired the same day. The tragedy prompted outpourings of sympathy and anger throughout South Korea and internationally. Officials promised to install better safety equipment in subway stations and added spray-on fire-resistant chemicals to the interiors of the Daegu Metropolitan subway cars. 6 stations were taken out of service for refurbishment and restored in April 2003. The tragedy was considered by many a national embarrassment, provoking debate about whether South Korea had cut too many corners in safety during its rapid industrialization. Within a few years of the accident, several metro trains throughout the country were subsequently refurbished to improve fire-resistant standards. On August 7th, the Daegu District Court convicted Choi Sang-yeol, operator of train 1080, and Choi Jong-hwan, operator of train 1079, sentencing them to prison for 5 and 4 years for criminal negligence. Kim Dae-han was convicted of arson and homicide. Although prosecutors and victims' families had asked for the death penalty, the court sentenced him to life in prison on account of his remorse and mental instability. Kim died in jail on August 31, 2004, in the city of Jinju, where he had been receiving medical treatment. South Korea, February 21st. A tragedy of errors was responsible for most of the 130 deaths in the subway fire here on Tuesday, investigators said today. The police are considering criminal charges of negligence. Fire and subway officials in the charged station where all the victims were killed or injured described faulty emergency signals, poor communications, and misjudgments on the part of subway workers with little or no training in how to cope with such a situation. Some of the doors were open and some were closed on the second train, the manager of an emergency fire crew, Chun Pak-chung, said as he headed into the station's depths. The control room turned off the power to stop the flames. Investigators were also questioning the engineer on the second of the 2 trains, who was reported to have fled with the master key to the subway car's doors, which were shut tight with screaming passengers trapped inside. It was on the second train that most of the victims died after the heat, flames, and smoke engulfed them with no means of escape. The chief investigator, Cho Do-won, said the engineer of that train had told the police that he directed passengers 3 times over the public address system to leave the train and then fled himself with the master key in his coat pocket. But other fire and subway officials said the doors of 3 of the train's 6 cars had already been shut by controllers. Decision to turn off electrical power out of fear that electricity surging through the train would intensify the flames. The overriding question was why the train entered the station at all, since it had stopped for several minutes, a few hundred yards away as flames and smoke spread through the first train. The police say the fire was started by a deranged man who ignited a plastic container of paint thinner with a cigarette lighter. Investigators listened to an audio tape of a conversation between the second train engineer and controllers. The officials recounted that the engineer said he was stopped in the tunnel and asked when or whether he should move his train into the station. He was eventually told to keep proceeding and then let out all his passengers. They thought at first it was a small incident, Mr. Chun said. When he pulled into the station, he opened the doors and the smoke was too heavy. He closed the doors. Again. President-elect Roh Moo-hyun visited the scene on Thursday, promising a thorough investigation after meeting with grief-stricken friends and relatives of victims. He said he felt shame and strong responsibility that people entrusted with the public's safety would have had such a poor sense of safety awareness. Investigators said that equipment was as much responsible as human error. The engineer tried to reopen the doors as the flames from the first train spread to the second. Officials said the doors worked on 3 cars before the power was cut. The root cause of the blazes spreading so quickly appeared to be the insulation between the layers of aluminum that form the car's shells, vinyl and plastic materials in seat cushions and strap handles, and heavy plastic matting on the floors. The fast-burning flames, which were estimated to have pushed temperatures as high as 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, leaped from the first to the second train and down the cars of each train, twisting aluminum, turning strap handles and floor covering to wax, and burning bodies so badly that officials fear identification of most victims will not be possible. Despite the horrific damage done by the flames, officials said, most victims were felled by the toxic fumes and smoke created by the burning vinyl and plastic seat cushions. When things reach a certain heat, they burn, a safety inspector, Chung Hee-gwon, said. The basic frames are metal, but the support material is plastic. Jung Chan-kyo, a subway system civil engineer, said the cars were built 10 years ago with material that is not used in later models. Because the cars were so old, that's why they caught fire, he said. There's no safety standard for vinyl material. New cars have cushions, but they are not made of vinyl. As for how the flames moved so quickly through every car on both trains, he said, it got so hot the next car caught on fire, even though the metal might not have been burning. Mr. Chun said the disaster had taught subway engineers lessons on how to prevent a recurrence. You should put in materials that are not flammable, he said. The vinyl and polyester in the advertisements were all responsible. We will be taking many more precautions. A man charged with starting a subway fire in South Korea that killed 198 people was sentenced to life in prison on Wednesday.